What is going on, my homies? We are in Florida. You guys enjoyed the mid-strolling video when we did a test of a variety of mid-strolling jigs in the pool. We're in Florida, so you either have to be at the lake, in the pool, or at the beach, right? So we're back at the pool, and what we're gonna do, there's a bunch of hype about some new Berkley baits. The Finisher, I love saying that, and the Crudge. The Crudge is exactly what it sounds like. It's jerkbait turned upside down, and that's what it is. The Finisher's a little bit different. It's sort of a fusion of, say, like a Rapala ice jig, a jigging spoon, and also kind of like a glide bait or a trap. It's a funky bait, but here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna jump in the pool. I'm gonna jump in the pool. Not looking forward to that because it's kind of cold, but I'm gonna jump in the pool, shoot some underwater shots, analyze the action, and then break down some of the applications for these baits and see where they fit in. They're specifically designed for forward-facing sonar, but they definitely have some applications outside that. So I'm gonna get my shorts on, go for a swim, and let's take a look at these things. I'm losing my game here. I f***ing it. All right. So we got in the water and looked at these things, and it was kind of an interesting experience. I'm not gonna lie, the Finisher is not my personal favorite. I actually really liked the Crudge a lot more. Maybe I'm just jerkbait adjacent or something like that, but we're gonna start with the Crudge because I think that one had one of the most interesting features out of both of them, and that's the ability to fall backwards. One of the things that's been the toughest problem to solve when it comes to catching some of these fish on forward-facing sonar is the fact that they follow just close enough, but don't close the deal. Like, I'm sure we've all experienced it. If you have active target or live scope, you'll have a fish that's behind the bait by like a foot, 2 foot. It's following, it's engaged, it's interested, but it just won't come that extra 2 feet to actually eat the bait. And what's really cool about this Crudge is because of the bill design and the weight system, basically when you stop your retrieve, this bait has a shimmy that goes backwards, just like the name. It's so funny because the name is inverted jerk. So the bill is inverted, the way the bait actually falls and the action is actually inverted as well. So the bait will actually shimmy backwards. It's almost kind of like a spy bait style kind of action. And I think that that's going to solve a problem. I'm not saying it's gonna catch every fish, but they do not see that back fall presentation. One of the interesting things too is this bait does sink. So unlike a jerk bait that sort of suspends or sometimes floats slightly, this is a bait where you can control how deep you wanna fish it. There's no cap on depth. So you basically throw it out. It's a lot like a countdown minnow when it comes to the Rapala style minnow baits. So you can throw this thing out and let it sink down, and it will kind of backflow and sink down. It actually sinks backwards as it does, which is also interesting. So if you screw up and make a short cast, you're okay because it's gonna flow back, and it'll all flow back more and more depending on how far you're actually sinking that bait down. When it comes to just standard action, when you're reeling it, it has a sort of back and forth and side to side shimmy. So it almost acts like a crankbait, or I would say even kind of like a spy bait, like the Dual Realis spy bait, where you're getting that shimmy as you're reeling it. When you jerk it, it has a weird sort of darting action. One of the things that I did notice that's something that I'll have to play with when I'm out on the water is there is a lot of raise to the bait. And what I mean by that is when you are reeling or when you are jerking it, this bait does tend to rise in the water. The pressure on this bill causes the bait to jump up in the water column quite a bit. So even though you're sinking it down, you're going to get a lot of lift, almost like with a chatterbait. When you actually impart pressure or tension onto the bait, she is going to rise quite a bit. So keeping it at the correct depth column is going to require some level of concentration with slow reeling, controlling your jerks, not overfishing it, I guess is the big key. The other thing that's going to be interesting too is how you set it up. So we tested both the Finisher and the Crudge on 8-pound fluorocarbon on a spinning rod running to 12-pound braid. That seemed to keep it down a little bit more. I'm wondering if using something like 7-pound fluorocarbon will allow you to keep it down, whereas if you want it to run a little bit higher, running like 12, 15-pound mono, something along those lines. The bill is wide enough where even if you're running, I wouldn't run like 17 or 20, but up to like 12 or 15-pound fluorocarbon or leader material, I think you're still gonna get a lot of back and forth vibration. It's very cool. I think the biggest thing is that backflow. That back sinking action is going to trigger a lot more fish because they're not going to be used to seeing something coming back to them. Most of the baits, mid-strolling, spy bait, jerk bait, everything stalls and moves forward versus going back. And I think that's the biggest highlight with this thing. I see applications, you know, open water fish, obviously. You know, you're throwing to individual fish or fish in pods, you're throwing it out there, sinking it down, using either a slow retrieve or that jerking action, and then you're letting it sink back down to them once you get those fish's attention, once you get them to engage. The other thing that's kind of interesting is I think there's something to be said for fishing it in like a hole, whether it's like a grass hole around a dock, letting it back sink under a dock. You throw it to the edge of the dock and then you let it back sink under the dock and then you bring it out. You don't need to skip the bait under the dock. It's one of the few hard baits that you'll actually be able to get back in there, and instead of actually skipping it, you can throw it to the edge and let it go back. It's also kind of cool too when it comes to underwater structures such as like a brush pile, a big pile of rocks that comes up. Because of the lift in the bill that's caused, you can throw this thing out, sink it back behind a structure, and then once you actually put tension on the line, that bait is going to rise and rise over that object, so you're not hanging on the object, but you're still sort of getting back behind it, down on the other side. The bait can come up, and then you put slack back in the line, you stop reeling, and that bait will sink back down. So you have a lot of depth control, as long as you're able to keep it on your forward-facing sonar and keep it pinned, keep your bait in sight, and control that action. It gives you a lot of viability. You're able to go up, but you're able to go back down, and you're able to go backwards. The Finisher, I love saying that. It's so Mortal Kombat, right? The Finisher, on the other end, I wasn't as impressed with this guy. It has some interesting potentials. It's the fusion of a lot of different baits. I really see it as, you know, kind of a spoon, kind of a spy bait, a little bit of there's some glide bait aspects to it. It's really a fusion of a lot of things. In the pool, we tested actually the little bit smaller one. I think this is like the 2.5 inch. I got the 1/2 ounce, the 3/4. They're basically made to cover a lot of different depth columns. The action is very subtle. I noticed that the most. With the light one, they talk about in the description on the packaging, it has sort of a glide bait or a back and forth kind of action just when you reel or put little pulsations in your reeling. With the small one, it was very hard to get that movement. It was very hard to get that glide. I can tell you though, I have fished the 1/2 ounce out on the water, and when you're fishing the 1/2 ounce, you're a little bit deeper, say 10 to 20 foot, and when you are that deep, I was able to get it to glide ever so slightly back and forth, but it's not nearly the erratic glide that I see, say, with my Chad Shad or with the bait Sanity Chimera. It was a much more subtle kind of swaying kind of glide versus that wide sort of figure-eighting glide back to the boat. However, with that being said, when you reel it, there was a very soft sort of shimmy that I think would set up best for winter or cold water periods or very finicky fish where there's a very slight roll to the bait when you're just reeling it. Don't think it's a big summer deal, but it definitely is, I guess, a subtle hard bait presentation that you're able to get pretty deep. The other thing that we noticed too is when you put some of that rod tip action like you would when you're mid-strolling, just that soft little kind of rod pop, that's when we got a very kind of like strong little wobble back and forth, kind of like what we were looking for with the mid-strolling jig head test, where you're looking for that side-to-side rocking. And it seemed like the Finisher was able to kind of get this sort of shimmy roll when you'd pop it. I think it has to do with, it has a very forward weight system. So when you're popping it, it's popping up and then it's wanting to go back down. So you're getting kind of this roll based upon the weight, the forward weight system that it has. It does, how would you put it? It does get a little bit erratic. So I think with some of the heavier ones, I think it's a more viable setup for some of that summer fishing. When you're popping, it's dancing and jerking back and forth. The one thing that we didn't test that actually I'm going to test out on the water is with both of these baits, the Crudge and the Finisher, we tied just a standard Palomar, so a standard just tie up straight to the eye knot. I've been playing a lot with a loop knot, and what I'm kind of wondering is with a blade bait, usually use either a clip or a loop knot, and I think this has some aspects of a blade bait incorporated as well, and I'm wondering if there's some value to putting a loop knot on there, to giving it a more fluid or loose action, really allowing the bait to perform and wobble freely versus having that knot directly tied. It was an interesting bait. Like I said, I was a lot less impressed with this thing than the Crudge. The Crudge seems to have a lot more applications, especially when it comes to forward-facing sonar. For me personally, especially, like I said, that backflow, whereas the Finisher is sort of a fusion of a lot of different baits, the blade bait, the spy bait, the spoon. It's able to get down a lot deeper than the Crudge, but at the same time, I don't know if the action is pronounced as I'd want it to be. I'm gonna have to play with some retrieves to see what you can get out of it. For me, it really highlights something that I've been talking about for a couple of years. There's really a whole arsenal of lures that can be developed specifically that really address needs and shortcomings, solve problems for guys who are really relying on forward-facing sonar. Love it, hate it or not, it's sort of the direction and the evolution that we're going. And there's a whole arsenal of baits that can really be developed under that umbrella that fix problems, address issues with trying to catch fish in the most efficient way possible and get those fish to react. Because basically, when it comes to forward-facing sonar, in a lot of situations, we're fishing for different fish than we've ever fished for. You know, we're able to sort of judge the attitude, judge the engagement, and react based on that. And these baits enable us to sort of make changes with immediacy, you know, changing the action, dropping the bait back. And when it comes down to it, I don't think this is the first or the last that you're gonna see when it comes to baits that are developed specifically to enable you to fish better with forward-facing sonar. You're only gonna see more and more of it because there's a specific arsenal that really accommodates that. If you guys enjoyed this video, I will put links to all this stuff down in the description box of the Tackle Warehouse so you can go check it out. There's a bunch of cool colors, especially with that Crudge, awesome jerkbait colors. But it's kind of neat to have a specific set of baits developed for forward-facing sonar. I'm gonna play with these out on the water a little bit in Florida, so you're probably gonna see them in some more videos. And if you guys have any experiences or have any feedback on the Crudge or the Finisher, love saying that, dude, drop it down in the comments below. We will see you back at the pool with me getting cold or back out on the water talking fishing. Tight lines, my homies.